Okay, I think we are about to start. So, thank you everybody. Thank you so much for coming to an event that I co-host with a colleague of mine, Lucas Mandel. My name is Michiel Hogeveen. I'm a member of European Parliament for the European Conservatives and Reformists Group. And today we are talking about the investigation of human rights in North Korea. A special welcome to the people here in the room and also especially to the people who are logged in online. Obviously it's not suited for everybody to be physically present in Strasbourg today. So again, thank you so much for joining online. Before we start, I have some practicalities, and that's considering the translation. If you are in the room, and I don't know whether it's possible online, you can switch to channel 1 for Korean, channel 2 for the English translation, and channel 3 for the French translation. For today, we have two discussions. The first part of our discussions will be with Pierre Rigouloux and with Greg, who are both sitting next to me, on the DPRK human rights 10 years after the UN Commission of Inquiry, past, present and future. Later, my colleague Lucas Mandel will join us and he will moderate the second part, where we talk about the witnesses to inhumanity, satellite imagery, lines of responsibility and accountability. And he will also speak with some of the people who are present here today, who are actually from DPRK and are willing to share their story. First, let me start that for me personally, it's 10 years ago that I graduated from university as a political scientist student, where I graduated on North Korea. And more specifically on the relations between South Korea and North Korea and the rapprochement policies that were conducted at the beginning of the years 2000 under President Kim Dae-jung. I've been studying North Korea for quite some time and visited the country multiple times as well. And I'm one of those people that are interested in this country because it's such an anomaly in the world. A country with the economic size of an average African country, Burkina Faso to say one, it continues to make world headlines with its nuclear weapons, ballistic missiles and erratic behavior. And it is often perceived as one of the biggest threats to regional and global security. One of the most misunderstood countries on earth, many of them based on myths and clickbait, but also due to the fact that this is the most isolated regime on earth. Just to share a brief history especially also for the people watching online, on how the situation came to be. After the Second World War, the Korean Peninsula was split in North and South. The devastated Korean War ended in a stalemate and in an armistice agreement where North and South were divided and a Korean peace treaty never was signed. North Korea has continued to be isolated, has continued to be more and more shown more and more erratic behavior, threatening the security of the Northeast Asia region and the world. Up until this day, especially after the Cold War ended, it was believed that we would come with what Francis Fukuyama famously said, an end of history, and gradually all countries would become more free market liberal democracies. But in North Korea we have seen the opposite. We have seen that it has chosen more isolation, it has chosen nuclear weapons as its ticket to the survival of its regime, and it's still one of the pre-Cold War countries that still exist today. Now, there have been, over the past decades, there have been multiple policies on how to deal with North Korea. And broadly, we can speak that there was basically hardline policies by some US presidents, by some South Korean presidents, and there have been engagement policies. Since the 1990s, we have seen multiple agreements tried to make the relationship with the DPRK work. We've seen the agreed framework, the leap year agreement, the Singapore summit, and unfortunately all have failed because of inconsistent policies and not tackling the root cause of why North Korea is so isolated in the first place. Now, on to our subject today, human rights in North Korea. While much is focused, when talking about North Korea, is focused on the geopolitical aspect, on the denuclearization, the desire to denuclearize the Korean Peninsula, we should not forget about the 25 million people who live inside the country. When I visited the country, I saw people isolated from the outside world, only allowed to be, not allowed to be in communication with us. And we were only allowed to see what the regime allowed us to see. But over the years, through testimonies of North Korean refugees, of NGOs such as HRNK, we have come to know that the North Korean economy thrives largely on suppressing its own people through forced labor, through slave labor. And this is something that has come out more and more. And this is also where our events come in, because it has been 2 years since the UN officially started a commission of inquiry talking about the human rights in North Korea. And we haven't spoken about this enough. So, without further ado, I would like to start our first part of our discussion, which is actually on this UN Commission of Inquiry. What has been found? What are we doing with the UN Commission of Inquiry's findings now? And how can we use these findings for future policies with North Korea that could involve maybe human rights? I'd like to introduce my speakers. First, I would like to give the floor to Pierre Rigolot, French historian and author of the Aquariums of Pyongyang, which has a very detailed testimony of someone who was in the Yodok prison camp. I actually used much of the knowledge that is written in the Aquariums of Pyongyang for my own book when I wrote it in 2017, where basically there was a very detailed description on also people from Japan who have an affiliation with the North Korean regime, and they were actually convinced to come back to North Korea from Japan. And when they found out that North Korea was not the socialist paradise that was promised, they wanted to go back to Japan, but in the end they ended up in a labor camp. And then after Pierre, we have Greg Scarlatui, who is obviously the executive director of HRNK, who will share some of his findings on the UN Commission of Inquiry and some of his ideas. So again, thank you so much, and I would now like to give the floor to Pierre Rigolot. Thank you so much.
Merci. Merci. Et merci aussi d'insister sur la venue du Japon d'un certain nombre de Coréens qui ont choisi d'aller au nord. Nous avons connu cela en Europe également, notamment avec les Arméniens, des Arméniens qui vivaient en France et qui sont partis dans une Arménie de leurs rêves, en tout cas telle qu'elle était présentée par les autorités soviétiques. Et ces gens qui sont partis là-bas, naturellement, ont rapidement compris le décalage entre la réalité et les rêves. Et il y a eu à Erivan, en Arménie, des manifestations. Vous vous rendez compte, dans l'Arménie socialiste, soviétique, il y a eu des manifestations pour demander le retour en France de ces Arméniens. Alors aujourd'hui, je voulais simplement dire quelques mots, et pas plus, sur cette enquête qui a été menée il y a 10 ans, ou plus exactement, dont nous avons eu les résultats il y a une dizaine d'années. Je suis membre du comité français d'aide à la population nord-coréenne et nous bénéficions à ce titre d'un énorme travail de documentation qui est réalisée par le Comité américain pour les droits de l'homme en Corée du Nord que préside Greg Scarlatoiu. Je voudrais aujourd'hui commencer en lui rendant hommage et en rendant hommage aux nombreux défenseurs des droits de l'homme qui ont œuvré au succès du rapport de la commission d'enquête sur le respect des droits de l'homme en Corée du Nord, dont nous commémorons aujourd'hui la publication il y a 10 ans. Alors évidemment, on pourrait remarquer que les systèmes totalitaires, comme celui de la Corée du Nord, n'attentent pas aux droits de l'homme, tout simplement parce que l'individu n'y est pas reconnu comme une valeur primordiale. Ils ne mettent pas en cause les droits de l'homme, ici ou là, comme ça peut être le cas de nos démocraties, mais de manière systémique, ils refusent d'y faire référence. Seulement l'enquête menée il y a une décennie n'a pas voulu condamner d'emblée la République démocratique et populaire de Corée et a préféré examiner à la loupe son comportement en ce qui concerne les différents droits humains. Les conclusions de cette enquête furent claires. Les libertés d'opinion, de croyance, d'expression, d'information, de circulation étaient sévèrement et continuellement bafouées en Corée du Nord. Sans doute, les observateurs impartiaux le savaient depuis longtemps, mais la précision des faits évoqués par cette commission d'enquête, la prudence et le sérieux avec laquelle ils ont été établis, l'insistance avec laquelle les témoignages ont été sollicités auprès des différentes parties, y compris les parties gouvernementales, sans parler naturellement du respect qui émane de l'ONU, ont fait que ce tableau des manquements nord-coréens aux droits humains a marqué les esprits. La publication de travaux aussi sérieux que ceux de la commission d'enquête méritait donc d'être rappelée et c'est ce que nous faisons aujourd'hui. Alors, une fois qu'on a rendu hommage à ces travaux, une question majeure mérite cependant d'être posée. Au-delà de l'information, l'enquête a-t-elle eu un effet pratique? Posé autrement, depuis cette enquête, quelque chose a-t-il changé dans la façon dont sont respectés ou non les droits de l'homme en Corée du Nord? Eh bien, je relèverai 3 domaines, car l'évolution est perceptible dans 3 domaines. Première évolution négative, c'est un bouclage renforcé de la frontière sino-nord-coréenne par la mise en place de moyens électroniques plus performants et par un repérage des appels téléphoniques désormais plus rapides et plus précis. En conséquence, le nombre de réfugiés a baissé drastiquement d'environ 1 millier en 2019, il n'est plus que de quelques dizaines cette année, réduisant dans les mêmes proportions le niveau de nos informations sur la Corée du Nord. La Corée du Nord a rarement été aussi refermée sur elle-même et évidemment l'épidémie de Covid n'a rien arrangé. Depuis 10 ans, on ne peut donc que constater des atteintes plus pesantes et plus systématiques au droit de circuler librement et en particulier de quitter le pays. Deuxième évolution, eh bien cette deuxième évolution, elle est liée aux relations des alliés russes et chinois de la Corée du Nord avec l'ONU. Malgré l'interdiction de cette pratique, la Corée du Nord continue de recourir à l'envoi de travailleurs à l'étranger pour remplir ses caisses en ponctionnant près de 90% du salaire versé à ces travailleurs. En juillet 2022, on estimait à plusieurs dizaines de milliers ces travailleurs d'outre-mer et surtout en Russie et en Chine qui avaient pourtant voté en faveur d'une résolution à l'ONU sanctionnant la Corée du Nord pour ses essais nucléaires et balistiques en interdisant justement l'envoi de travailleurs à l'étranger. Heureusement, après ces deux points plutôt négatifs et attristants, le troisième changement important que je voudrais souligner depuis les conclusions de la commission d'enquête compense, au moins partiellement, le tarissement des sources habituelles d'information. C'est la mise en évidence de plus en plus nette par un ensemble de photos satellitaires américaines de l'existence d'un réseau de camps de concentration en Corée du Nord. Il ne s'agit plus de récits de témoins. Nous en avons eu, et en particulier, j'ai publié les aquariums de Pyongyang avec mon ami Kang Sol-wan, qui sortait du camp de Yodok, où il était entré jeune enfant. Non, maintenant il s'agit d'images photographiques claires. Comme vous le savez, le goulag soviétique, les camps nazis ont largement échappé aux images. Ils n'aiment pas les images d'eux-mêmes. Les développements techniques actuels permettent au contraire de faire éclater à la face du monde l'évidence, en quelque sorte expérimentale, des camps de concentration nord-coréens. Ils confirment que plus de 100 000 hommes, femmes et enfants sont détenus dans un système qui suppose une conception collective de la responsabilité où la faute d'un seul aboutit à la punition de toute une famille. Les témoignages recueillis complètent les données irréfutables établies par les photographies satellitaires. En tout cas, grâce à ces photos, il n'y a plus de goulag caché en Corée du Nord, pour reprendre le titre d'une des études les plus remarquables, les plus complètes sur les camps nord-coréens, celle de David Hawk, dont vous pourrez lire un certain nombre d'articles à l'entrée de la salle. Le goulag nord-coréen est devenu une évidence que ne peut plus nier le pouvoir à Pyongyang, et il ne pourra pas, comme il l'a fait lors de la publication du rapport de la commission d'enquête, s'en prendre aux mensonges de ceux qui ont trahi leur pays. Voilà, c'est un beau cadeau d'anniversaire aux concepteurs et aux rédacteurs du rapport de la commission d'enquête sur les droits humains en Corée du Nord que nous faisons en nous réunissant ici et en marquant ce 10e anniversaire de la publication de ce rapport. Je vous remercie beaucoup.
Thank you so much for this elaborate explanation. And before I continue to ask questions, I would like to hear what Greg Scarlatio has to explain on the UN COA. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael, and let me thank you, MEP Huhoven, for being a friend of our cause, for being so supportive for quite a few years now, and for hosting this report together with this event together with MEP Lukasz Mondal. My mission today is fairly straightforward. I'm very happy that Professor Rigolo and you, Michael, have already laid out the main blocks of information. I have to say that Professor Rigolo's book was tremendously helpful, The Aquariums of Pyongyang, in terms of establishing awareness of North Korean human rights violations, in particular of North Korea's vast system of unlawful imprisonment. My organization has been around since 2001. We're going to sample our methodology today. Later, Joe Bermudez will present on our satellite imagery analysis. Robert Collins will present on North Korean regime dynamics and North Korea's policy of human rights denial, We will also have 3 witnesses who have had the courage, the will, the strength to come here and testify before you today. 1 former prisoner from Camp 15, that's a political prison camp. 2 ladies who are prisoners at Chongori number 12, re-education through labor camp. Speaking of women, since before the UNCOI and since the UNCOI over the past 10 years, women have taken the brunt of repression in North Korea. Why? Because people were starving in the 1990s, and they had to establish informal markets, farmers' markets, open markets, black markets. The main market agents have been women. Professor Rigolo was mentioning the draconian border controls and surveillance that have been put into place. The ones who try to escape the country in search of perhaps freedom, perhaps better economic opportunity are women. So they're the ones who are arrested and forcibly repatriated by China in direct violation of the 1951 UN Refugee Convention. They're also the ones who are arrested at markets in North Korea and punished for perceived wrongdoing. What were the main findings of the UNCOI established 10 years ago? The report was submitted to the UN Human Rights Council 9 years ago. Of course, there's a roadmap for transformation, the peaceful transformation of North Korea, transforming North Korea's economy, society, politics. That's also in the UNCOI report. The finding that has been most popular, tragically, is that many of the human rights violations perpetrated, especially at North Korea's detention centers, amount to crimes against humanity. Consequently, the UNCOI recommended, because North Korea, of course, is not a party to the 2002 Rome Statute or a member of the International Criminal Court, the UNCOI recommended referral by the UN Security Council. Of course, this can be a tricky issue. There's China, there's Russia, both P5 members. Human rights organizations have been seeking alternative ways to seek accountability in North Korea. The last thing we want to do 10 years from now is to celebrate 20 years since the UNCOI, while significant action hasn't happened, while significant follow-up hasn't happened. I have had the privilege of being part of a group that combines both human rights experts and security experts. Your speaker today, Robert Collins, Bob Collins, is part of this group, together with some of us human rights people, and also with security experts in the United States who are in charge of very high-level negotiations. For example, Ambassador Robert Joseph, a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for the counterproliferation of weapons of mass destruction, Ambassador Joseph Detrani, who was head of the U.S. delegation at the six-party talks. Our challenge before the UNCOI, during the UNCOI, and after the UNCOI has been that human rights is always outperformed by other very important issues: political, security, military issues, nukes, and missiles. Our challenge is to elevate human rights to the point where it becomes an issue that's treated more or less equally with other very important issues. Human rights is not an obstacle to resolving North Korea's nuclear and missile problems. Human rights is the key, because the regime doesn't know how to rule over North Korea without violating the human rights of the North Korean people. What we need is an approach that factors in human rights. In order to do that, we recommend that the regime in Pyongyang will not abandon its nuclear weapons and will persist with efforts to get all of us, Europeans, Americans, all friends elsewhere in the world, in South Korea and Japan and elsewhere, to accept North Korea as a nuclear power. In its current state, I think that we all agree that the Kim regime of North Korea is not going to abandon its nuclear weapons. I think that we all agree that change can come only from within, and by the way, by that I mean peaceful change peaceful transformation, the same way we're talking about transformation in the older Soviet Union. So we need to start thinking of a strategy that places human rights up front. We need to think of comprehensive information and influence campaigns, and eventually, I think that what we all want to do is a peaceful, prosperous, democratic, unified Korean Peninsula. Moving forward, security experts will tell us that we continue to need containment, we continue to need deterrence, based on a variety of factors, including, most importantly, allies. When it comes to human rights, we've had a very strong alliance active at the UN, comprising the European Union, the United States, Japan, Korea, South Korea, of course, Australia, New Zealand, and others. We took a few steps back. We somehow abandoned the high ground we once held in order to engage in summit diplomacy with North Korea. I'm not criticizing summit diplomacy. We've tried a lot of things. Six-party talks, Geneva Agreed Framework. We tried this one for a change as well. But again, we think that we must continue to consider using the integration of all tools of statecraft while placing the promotion of human rights in North Korea at the center of everybody's strategy. Of course, Pyongyang will vehemently oppose any such attempts. Pyongyang is very upset about, Pyongyang will be very upset about this meeting as well. They're very upset about the ARIA formula meeting that's going to take place at the UN in New York City. They will be upset about the event we'll be co-hosting with the permanent missions of Australia, the European Union, the United States, Romania, South Korea, and Japan this Friday in Geneva. And again, and this is the last thing I'm going to say, Michael, what we have noticed over the years is that Pyongyang does pay attention to human rights. After the UN COI report, they deployed their foreign minister to the UN in New York for the first time in 15 years. Of course, he gave a speech denying that these violations were happening. But then again, it is a great way to get the attention of the authorities in Pyongyang. The current status quo is untenable. What we truly need is a paradigm shift, and we do need the help of great friends within the European Parliament, and we do need the help of the European Parliament in order to persuade our own decision makers and our own authorities that, quite frankly, everything else has been tried, and of everything that we've got out there on the table, I think that the human rights upfront approach is the only feasible alternative at this stage. I'll stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, and a very interesting take on how to change and break the stalemate in North Korea policies. Now, Professor Rigolo, also thank you so much for your interesting take. And one of the things that struck me most, what you said, is at the beginning of your speech, you said that North Korea doesn't see human rights violated on the individual level, but on a systemic level. And I think you are completely right on that, because according to how I experienced North Korea, is that they don't believe in the individual level. They believe that the Korean society is formed of one corpus, with the Kim as the head, basically, on top of it. And so they don't look at necessarily individual rights, individual freedoms. Now, my question to you is, how does the North Korean regime explain these, we call them human rights violations, but explain the behavior of the regime towards its people? How do they justify it by themselves? Is it because some people are seen as anti-revolutionaries? Could you please explain what the dynamic of the regime itself is on their policies?
Il me semble que vous avez raison. l'État nord-coréen ne considère pas les droits de l'homme comme, la plupart du temps, il ne considère pas les droits de l'homme comme étant autre chose qu'une arme entre les mains des ennemis impérialistes. Mais plus profondément, et c'est ce que vous avez souligné, il ne les considère pas tout simplement parce que le corps social, le corps national est uni derrière et même dans son leader et il suit la voie que celui-ci a décidé, que celui-ci indique. Et vous évoquiez les missiles et les essais nucléaires. Nous avons eu ces temps derniers de nombreuses images du leader avec sa fille et tous les journalistes s'interrogeaient pourquoi le fait-il. Mais il faut savoir que c'est une façon de montrer que l'État nord-coréen va continuer à avancer dans la voie qui est la sienne sans que l'on puisse de l'extérieur faire quoi que ce soit du fait de l'armement nucléaire dont il s'est doté. On appelle en France cela la dissuasion nucléaire. Et à travers cette dissuasion, ou grâce à cette dissuasion nucléaire, l'idée est de poursuivre telle que la Corée du Nord existe actuellement. Donc il y a quelque chose de très, j'allais dire, de très profondément ancré dans le système nord-coréen. L'idée qu'il est sur la bonne voie et qu'il doit continuer et qu'il s'est donné les armes pour qu'on ne l'empêche pas de continuer. Voilà un premier point. Reste quand même qu'il y a une faiblesse peut-être de notre part qui est que nous n'arrivons pas à atteindre la population nord-coréenne. Cette vue de l'avenir que j'ai décrite tout à l'heure, une grande partie de la population la partage. Et ils la partagent d'autant plus qu'ils n'ont pas accès à d'autres informations. Alors, je me permets de demander, aussi bien à ceux qui nous écoutent qu'à vous, au fond, est-ce que ce n'est pas l'effort majeur que nous devrions faire, l'effort pour parvenir à faire pénétrer cette idée du manque de respect à l'égard des droits humains dans la Corée du Nord? Faire en sorte que l'information qui vient si peu de la Corée du Nord vers l'extérieur, elle soit renvoyée en quelque sorte, relayée par un autre type d'information, celle que nous pouvons donner sur le fonctionnement des démocraties, sur les exigences des démocraties et sur le bien-être économique, politique, idéologique qui pourrait en être tiré par la population. Donc, ma réponse, elle est, comme vous le voyez, double. Premièrement, à l'intérieur de la Corée du Nord, il n'y a pas de prise en considération des droits de l'homme et de façon systémique. Mais deux, nous pouvons nous demander si nous faisons assez pour que les informations et même l'exigence de respect des droits de l'homme soient répandues parmi la population nord-coréenne. Je le demande et je pense que c'est un des prochains une des prochaines réflexions que nous devons avoir, comment faire pour que l'idée des droits humains pénètre davantage à l'intérieur de la Corée du Nord. Voilà.
Thank you so much. And I think you made some excellent points, especially on the fact that when we talk about human rights in North Korea, the definition of human rights as we know it is unknown to the North Korean people. Now, my follow-up question on that regard is that you are saying that we need to reach out to attempt to reach out to the North Korean people, try to provide them with information, try to provide them with knowledge about the economy, about improving their lives. And then the question in geopolitically that always comes up is that on the one hand, we try to isolate the regime, punish them for their nuclear ambitions, punish them for their missile testing. At the same time, also isolating the people by continue to conduct sanctions, by continuing to isolate the regime from the global community. So critics of these policies would say, well, actually, with our geopolitical strategy of isolating the regime, continuing to isolate the country, you actually also embolden the regime. So the regime could say, well, your life is impoverished to its people. They can say, your life is impoverished, but that's because of the Yankee blockade, so to say, or because of the, between brackets. What's your take on that?
Je dirais que notre ami Greg a répondu tout à l'heure en évoquant le développement de l'économie de l'ombre, des marchés et finalement d'un certain nombre de relations commerciales qui échappent au pouvoir. Je crois que c'est très important. Et il ne faut pas oublier que c'est précisément au moment même où le pays était le plus en détresse avec la famine qui l'a frappé durement dans les années 90, qu'on a vu la population nord-coréenne reprendre quelque chose en main, c'est-à-dire son propre destin. Naturellement, c'est limité, elle ne peut pas tout faire, la police existe, le quadrillage idéologique, politique et policier existe. Il n'empêche que du fond même de ces difficultés économiques, on a vu surgir une organisation et des exigences d'action pour se débrouiller et obtenir ce dont la population a besoin, comme on l'avait jamais fait. Ce qui fait que je reconnais l'objection, la validité de l'objection que vous avez émise tout à l'heure, mais en même temps, je dis, ne perdons pas espoir. Ne perdons pas espoir au sein même de la difficulté. On a vu surgir quelque chose qui échappait un peu plus à l'État. Il y avait des activités commerciales évidemment méconnues, des marchés qui se sont développés et on sent bien que le pouvoir ne peut plus tout faire de ce côté-là. Il ne peut plus les supprimer entièrement, il essaye de les contrôler et il essaye d'en tirer profit. Alors c'est une nouvelle étape, je pense, que nous devons suivre dans les prochaines années en Corée du Nord.
Thank you, and I see that my colleague Lucas Mandel has entered the room, and he will take care of the next part. Just to close this discussion, Greg, just one short question. You spoke about a human rights upfront approach. Now, I remember when I was in North Korea, and when I would address human rights, labor camps, they would immediately shut down. They would not they were not willing to talk to me anymore. And it would take a long time to restore some of the relationships that we had built up. If you try to address human rights in diplomacy with the regime, how would you do so without having the regime isolating itself even further?
The international obligations that North Korea has assumed by becoming a UN member state in 1992. North Korea is a party to the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, the International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, the Convention, the Children's Convention, the Women's Convention, the Convention on the Protection of the Rights of People with Disabilities. So, as a member to all of these international instruments, the DPRK must abide by its international obligations. Another problem is that there is a deep rift between official ideology, between Kim Il-sungism, and North Korea's very constitution. If you read North Korea's constitution, other legislation, you will see that fundamental human rights, such as freedom of speech, freedom of religion, exist on paper only. They're not observed, and during those at least weekly ideological training sessions, as Bob Collins will probably tell us later today, they're not taught about their own constitution or UN instruments that the DPRK has acceded to. All they're taught is about the 10 principles of monolithic ideology, the TPMI, the ideology that is supposed not to look after the people or improve their human rights, but to maintain the current regime in power in its current shape and form as a human rights violator. Going back to information campaigns that both you and Pierre have mentioned, we need to tell them three stories. I like to address this as the three stories. The story of their own human rights, which they do not understand, the story of the outside world, especially free, prosperous, democratic Republic of Korea, South Korea, and also the story of the corruption of their leadership, especially the top leadership in a country that claims to be socialist. The DPRK is not democratic, it's not popular, it has nothing to do with the welfare of the people, surely no longer a republic after 3 generations of dynastic succession and leadership. So people need to understand this fundamental rift between the rights they're supposed to have and the way they're treated by their regime. On the international stage, let's begin with the international instruments.
Thank you so much, and I can continue. We can continue this discussion for a long time because it's such a fascinating and puzzling topic. But we have to move on. My dear colleague Lucas Mandel will take care of the next session on witnessing to inhumanity, satellite imagery, lines of responsibility and accountability.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, terrific. Absolutely.
Good afternoon also from my side. First of all, I want to thank my dear colleague Michel Hoogeveen for the initiative for today's event. Michel is not only a parliamentarian, he's also an academic expert on the Korean Peninsula, and this is what we always see when we visit the Korean Peninsula. There is a lot of academic knowledge on Michel's side, and that's the way I want to invite Mr. Collins as well as Jung Kwang Il and the 2 ladies to the panel.
Okay.
Take your seats. Maybe the ladies in the center. So thanks to all of you for joining. Online connected with us is Joseph Bermudez from the co-organizers, the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea, HRNK. And as far as I know, we will start this part of today's discussion with a presentation by Mr. Bermudez, which will be transferred online to us. We can watch it, we can listen, and then we will start our discussion also on site here in the room. Yeah, I can see you, Mr. Bermudez. Now I can't see you anymore. Now I can see you again. Can you hear us and can you see us? We can see you, but we can't yet hear you, unfortunately.
How about now?
Yes.
Perfect. Now we can hear you too. I hope it will be possible to share your presentation. Yes, your presentation already appears on the screen. We are happy to have you connected online and look forward to the insights you will share with us. The floor is yours, Mr. Bermudez.
Thank you, and good afternoon there. I've been studying North Korea for over 40 years, much like Bob Collins. And what I'm going to present today is a small, brief presentation on how HRNK has used satellite imagery to provide insight and reveal human rights abuses in North Korea by examining their detention facilities. And I'm sure the other members of the panel can provide greater details of what I'm talking about. Next slide, please. We all know that North Korea is the most closed society in the world, or at least one of them. And as mentioned by the other speakers, it's because of the extreme restrictions they put on movement and communications with the outside world. And they have tight control over their media and communications. Next, please. As stated before by one of the presenters, North Koreans who have left their country have often described, and as some of the other speakers will describe in detail, there is no real meaningful legal due process. It's an oppressive society. It's a police society. The detainees in detention camps are used for forced labor, and there are human rights abuses across the board. Most Westerners would be shocked by what is taking place in North Korea. And this is not only within detention facilities, it's in society in general. Next, please. And as was mentioned earlier, for over 10 years, HRNK's satellite imagery project has used a unique process of combining official statements, interviews, statements by former detainees, discussions with political and defense and intelligence officials around the world. And they've combined this with satellite imagery to produce a unique body of information. And that body of information is becoming more and more important as North Korea becomes more and more closed to us. Next, please. This is an example. This is COASO number 12, Jonggo Ri, and I believe one of the presenters will discuss this. This gives us an opportunity. Satellite imagery gives us an opportunity to take what we obtain from former detainees and other sources and combine it to provide a detailed picture of what is the camp. Changes, when it came about. We produce a timeline of changes and timeline information so that in the future, people will be able to be held accountable in an international criminal court or any other due process of law. And we can confirm and validate statements by officials and also by former detainees to a certain degree using this satellite imagery. The women's section of the prison, as mentioned before by Greg, is that small little section over here. I'm not sure if you can see it, but it's that small little rectangle above the men's prison. Next slide, please. Since 2012, we've produced 22 detailed satellite imagery reports, 2 3D renderings, and we have 3 imagery reports in production as we speak. There's a little star there that says that the report we produced on the Cheongsan number 11 detention facility was the equivalent of 12 standard reports due to its size. It occupies a good part of a county in North Korea. Next, please. There are challenges to using satellite imagery. The satellites only come over a certain spot of the Earth, once in orbit, and it only stays over a specific AOI for a minute if we're really lucky. Okay? Weather conditions in East Asia are really a challenge. Latency and timing of imagery collection. So not every satellite is on all the time. That's just too much data. Okay? So it's turned on, the camera is turned on and off, depending upon what is required by the collection planning procedures. Of resolution. So we measure resolution in GSD, ground sensor distance. So the sensor, camera, in the satellite has 2 adjacent pixels. The distance between the center of those 2 pixels as it's measured on the ground is what we call GSD. So if we had 2 pixels that were next to each other on the satellite, when we measure that distance on the ground, it's 30 centimeters. That is the best commercial satellite imagery presently available. There's hope that we will soon move to 15 centimeter. So an object, 15 centimeters or smaller would be a challenge to distinguish, but anything larger than 15 centimeters would be distinguishable. All these challenges, one of the biggest, is having an analyst who has experience in satellite imagery and experience with North Korea. I once was asked to participate in a project using artificial intelligence to examine North Korea. And this organization came back to me and said they had identified within 1 square kilometer over 1,000 anti-aircraft artillery positions. Anyone who's ever been in the military knows that's impossible. And I told them it was impossible. I didn't even look at it. I said, come back when you do better. And they did this through 3 iterations, and they got it down to a much smaller number. And I looked at it. I said, you're wrong. You're completely wrong. All of these is wrong. What they were looking at were traditional Korean grave sites, which points out the need for an analyst who understands the culture and the history of North Korea. This is a challenge. Next, please. This is what one satellite company, Maxar, collected over North Korea in 30 days. These are the images that we can acquire, we can download, and they're in what we call a public archive. There is a private archive which we don't have the ability to access at this point in time, which consists of images collected by foreign governments who pay for them, multinational corporations, news organizations, and other entities such as those who pay for an image collect and then keep it private. That's part of their contract. But this is what's available in 30 days. And there's only one satellite company. And there are at least 5 high-resolution companies that collect over North Korea. Next, please. This is weather over North Korea. This was taken last year on October 27th. And I can tell you that an image I looked at this morning is almost identical to this. Clouds over North Korea, and South Korea for that matter, are a real challenge which affects our ability to collect imagery. Next, please. Okay. As I said before, it has certain advantages. We can see anywhere in the world. I can fly over any place in the world, collect an image, and there's no legal violation. Okay? Each image can, cover up to, 100 kilometers, even more at times. Growing persistency. As more companies come online, we have greater ability to collect imagery. We also have multi-year coverage. Commercial satellite imagery became popular and available to the public technically in 1999. it actually became practical in the early 2000s, say 2000, 2002. Okay, that builds up a history of imagery that we can go back and look at. The U.S. government has declassified spy satellite imagery from about 1960, 61, all the way through 1984. There's a gap between 84 and 1999 where high-resolution satellite imagery is not available, but there is hope that the U.S. government will declassify more and that other nations that have high-resolution satellite imagery collection satellites will also start declassifying their older imagery. As I mentioned before, experience. It is experience that counts because we are able to discover new new detention facilities. We can confirm or negate sources that tell us about these. Okay, and we can serve with satellite imagery objective evidence that is available to be presented in a court of law. Someone says there was never a building there. Well, I have an image that says there's a building there. This is evidence. And with interpretation by experienced analysts, this provides context for a court of law to make a decision as to liability in human rights abuses. Next, please. And I just mentioned all of these. Bob Collins will, certainly bring some detailed explanations of how camps are organized and the nationwide system of oppression by security agencies. I want to bring your attention to the last two items. We can identify through satellite imagery, saying a detainee leaves in 2001. They come here, they explain what they've experienced and, what they know. We show them satellite imagery from when they were there. We then compare that with what they said. Then we look at imagery from today, and we can see how components of detention facilities have changed, how new ones have been constructed. Don't think of this as a static, organization or a static, I can't even think of it, static organization. This is a dynamic organization that changes with the political winds in North Korea. Next, please. This is an example of a declassified satellite image over the Chungsun number 11 detention facility. This is on the west coast of North Korea. And you see the outline. Well, just to the left of that outline is water. It's mudflats now because the tide's out. But this gives you, it's right on the coast, west of Pyongyang, the capital. This was taken in 1975. Now, if you go to the next image, please. This is what it looks like today. If you look at all the green hexagons, those are locations where a former detainee told us about, and we have confirmed. Okay? The green hexagons are additional, I'm sorry, I got that confused. The green ones are the ones that the detainee told us about. And the red ones are ones that we had identified in an analysis of the satellite imagery. Okay? The orange ones are support structures that are identified by both satellite imagery and the former detainee. So you can see from the red dots, the red hexagons, what we have identified using satellite imagery. And you can see that the water is, going out. Next presentation, please. Next slide. Okay. Here are what we call detainee divisions B and C. These are ones that we have identified. Okay, and there's certain characteristics, and I'm really not going to go into all those now, but I can if anybody ever wants to discuss that in detail. Notice that we have detainee division B, and you can see the main building, okay, and you see there's an area on the left side right in front of a guard post. That's the red triangle. Now, as when we flip to the new image, the next image, Can you see how the area has changed? I have where it says greenhouse rearranged. Well, the whole area has been rearranged. See where detainee division C is. This is a new detainee division. And notice to the right of that, there's a threshing house. Well, the new detainee division and the threshing house are clear indications of an increase in detainee population, a significant increase in detainee population. Next, please. This is Kwan Lee So, number 25. This is more like what we would consider a prison in the West, a small prison. However, there's something very unique about it. We have the prison itself is the prison where detainees and the administration officers, just a small little area on the right-hand side. The larger area are fields being worked by those detainees. And there's some other unique characteristics of it I want to point out. Notice the distribution of the green dots, which are entrances, and then more importantly, the red dots. Look at the number of red triangles in this image. Those are guard positions. Okay? Notice the concentration on the south side of the image. Can we go to the next image, please? This is a close-up of it. Okay? In 2010, they built that walled building right in the center. And shortly afterwards, they built in 2018 another small compound. Why would you need a compound, a walled compound inside of a prison, a detention facility, with all those guard positions around it? Whatever is in there, whomever is in there, is considered a high-value detainee, an important detainee by the North Korean regime. This is almost unprecedented. You don't see this concentration of guard positions at a prison in the West. Next, please. Another example of how we trace the life of a detention facility. This is Kowaso number 3, Tosangni. It's just south of Sinuiju in the north. Here's a declassified satellite image from 1968. There's nothing there really. A small building, some agricultural land. Next image. 1977, another declassified satellite image. We have a walled detention facility. Okay? And you can see that there are guard positions around it. We see headquarters and administration areas to the south of it. We also see a number of large buildings. Okay, you see the one in the center top that says light industrial building? It's in the process of being torn down. Can we go to the next image?
Excuse me, Mr. Bermudez, I hope you can hear me.
Yes, I can.
In order to give the other panelists the opportunity to also speak, and since we are meant to have this panel until 3 p.m., it's highly impressive what you are providing us with, and especially what you are doing to gather this information, but I have to stick a bit on our time schedule. That's why I want to kindly ask you to be brief.
Okay. This is the image of the camp in 2021. Notice the changes. The facility they were raising in the north part of the image is now greenhouses. They have to sustain themselves because the food system is no longer able to support them. And we'll just take one more image and then I'll finish mine. In 2014, an image was collected that showed the execution of a senior North Korean official by anti-aircraft guns. You see the buses in the lower right-hand corner. They brought members from the Kim Il-sung Political Academy, students, to the viewing area. Right in front of the viewing area, you see a line of white dots. If you were to zoom in, you'd see that these are the crews of the anti-aircraft guns, which are just in front of them. Those little black splotches. This entire range is about 150 meters long. The The targets, which are human beings tied to poles, are maybe 75 meters out, maybe even less. And they were executed by those 6 anti-aircraft guns, each of which has a 14.5 millimeter, 4 14.5 millimeter cannons on it. This was overkill in the grossest sense, an indication of the violence of the North Korean regime and the attempt to intimidate citizens. And with that, I will stop. I apologize for going too long.
Thank you very much for providing us with this information for many different reasons. It's a really an extremely valuable work you're doing in the satellite imagery you're providing us with. For the time that's left for us, I want to first hand over the floor to the 2 lady prisoners who were in maybe one of the camps which were on the pictures, I don't know. It's called camp number 12, Yongo-ri, for re-education through forced labor, as it is called there. And after them, I would hand over the floor for the testimony of Jung Kwan-il, who was in the camp number 15, Yoduk, as a political prisoner. So maybe first to the ladies. Whom of you can I give the floor first? Maybe to you. We look forward to your introductory remarks, Madam.
저는 1968년 함경북도 무산에서 태어났습니다. 북한에 있을 때 하던 일을 그만두고 생계를 유지하기 위하여 방법을 찾아야 했습니다. 그러다가 북한에서 탈북하여 한국에 온 탈북민과 또 북한에 있는 가족들과의 서로 전화를 연결시켜주고 돈을 받는 그러한 일이 있다는 것을 알게 되었습니다. 이 일을 하다 보니 2015년 4월에 무산군 무산 분수소에 잡혔습니다. 전화를 시키려고 사람을 데려갔는데 손전화를 가지고 있던 사람이 잡혀서 저도 같이 잡혔습니다. 저는 당원이었고 직접 손전화를 가지고 일을 하지 않았기 때문에 저는 하루 만에 풀려났습니다. 하지만 며칠 후에 다시 구금되었고 5월 초에 무산군 구류장에 다시 이감되었습니다. 거기에서 20일 넘도록 예심을 받았습니다. 저를 체포한 분수소 지도원은 무산군 그 단련 교양대에서 3개월만 간단하게 하면 되겠다 이렇게 말을 하였습니다. 그런데 예심원은 다른 제명을 더 씌워가지고 저를 1년형이라는 단련형을 받게 하였습니다. 2015년 5월 27일 재판을 받고 1년형을 선고받고 정거리 교화소 맞은편에 있는 새롭게 설립된 함경북도 정거리 단련대로 옮겨갔습니다. 아직 철조망은 없지만은 군인들이 총을 메고 저희를 지켰습니다. 여자가 70명이 있었고 남자반은 따로 있었습니다. 매일 아침 6시에 기상을 해서 노래를 부르면서 운동장을 10바퀴 뛰어야 했고 때로는 20바퀴도 뛰어서 합격을 맞아야만이 밥을 먹었습니다. 옥수수를 갈은 밥을 3스푼 정도랑 소금물에 시래기 몇 개 뜬 국물을 마셨습니다. 밥을 먹고는 바로 일을 나갔습니다. 농사철에는 농사를 짓고 겨울에는 산에 가서 나무를 하였습니다. 겨울에 산에 나가지 않은 날에는 공동 화장실에서 똥을 푼 그 꽁꽁은 똥을 꽃갱이로 까구나 했습니다. 그리고는 제대로 씻을 물도 없어서 씻지 못하고 잠을 자다 보니 냄새가 없어지지 않았습니다. 누울 물이 부족해서 옷도 세탁을 못했고 씻지도 못한 상태에서 다음날에 또 일을 나가곤 하였습니다. 생활 필수품도 제대로 공급되지 않았고 일을 하다가 다쳐도 가족들에게서 이야기 오지 않으면 그냥 방치된 채로 생활하였습니다. 일을 못 나가면 그만큼 출소 날짜가 지연되기 때문에 다쳐도 아프고 힘들어도 일을 나갔습니다. 저는 2016년 6월에 병을 마치고 나왔습니다. 나올 때 이 안에서 보고 들은 것들을 말하지 않겠다는 서약서를 써야 했습니다. 저는 2019년 2월에 한국에 도착했습니다. 북한에서는 죄가 없어도 가둡니다. 북한이 전체가 감옥입니다. 먹고 살려고 움직이는 걸음걸음이 법에 저촉됐고 걸음걸음이 죄입니다. 그래서 수많은 사람들이 죽어가고 있습니다. 북한의 인권 실태에 대해서 관심을 가지고 더 알아주었으면 좋겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you very much. I guess the audience is really keen to give you a hand after this testimony. Thanks for being with us. Thanks for sharing this with us. And thanks for also encouraging us to even more emphasize the importance of human rights in North Korea and to pay more scrutiny on the situation there. Next would be the lady who was as well imprisoned in, I guess, the same forced labor camp number 12, Yongo-ri. The floor is yours.
저는 1976년 함경북도 무산군에서 태어났습니다. 2015년도에 이렇게 한국에 온 친구하고 통화를 해서 그게 발각이 돼서 보이부에 잡혔다가 보이부에서 한 달 조사를 받고 보안서 부류장으로 옮겨졌다가 6개월 동안 조사를 받고 정거리 교화소에 신체 검사를 했고 또 신입반으로 인계되었습니다. 그리고 알몸인 상태로 세워놓고 가져온 짐을 수색을 했고 또 거기서는 제수복이 따로 없었습니다. 멀쩡한 옷을 절반을 잘라서 윗옷과 바지를 짝짝이로 꿰매서 입게 만들었습니다. 도주하는 사람들이 있다 보니 밖에 나가면 눈에 띄게 하려고 한 것이었습니다. 입소 후 신입반 생활을 한 달을 했고 이때는 교화소 예절과 생활 준칙을 외워야 했습니다. 외우지 못하면 처벌이 있었는데 그 처벌은 밤에 경비를 2시간씩 썼는데 그 처벌로서 4시간 내지 6시간을 더 서게끔 하는 그런 처벌을 또 있었습니다. 그리고 매일 오전 8시부터 저녁까지는 또 일을 해야 됐고 농사를 짓는 반도 있었고 재봉을 하는 반도 있었고 또 이렇게 가발이라든가 풀잎으로 만드는 그런 모자를 만드는 그런 반도 있었습니다. 일을 마치면 매일 저녁 교육이 있었습니다. 정치적인 교육도 있었고 새 설날 같은 때는 그 신년사를 듣고 외워야 했습니다. 밥은 옥수밥 덩어리에 소금국을 먹었고 먹을 것이 부족해서 많은 사람들이 허약으로 죽었습니다. 제가 교화소에 도착했을 때는 그때 당시 여자 인원이 1,100명이었는데 제가 1년을 교화 생활하고 끝나고 나갈 때는 900명으로 줄어들었습니다. 가족이 면회를 와서 먹을 거나 생활품을 주지 않으면 버티기 어려운 상황이었습니다. 수감자가 죽으면 소달구지에 실어서 불망산이라는 곳으로 옮겨졌고 또 너무 많이 죽어서 일주일 동안 시체를 모아놓고 일주일마다 큰 새 통에 넣고 불태워서 태워 죽었습니다. 또 죽어도 가족한테 알려주지 않았고 한 번은 제가 제 옆에서 그 수감을 하던 허약자분이 한 번 죽었는데 가족이 알지 못하고 3달 후에 면회를 왔던 적도 있었습니다. 남자 여자 가리지 않고 심한 구타가 있었고 또 험한 말을 듣는 것이 일상이었습니다. 그 안에서는 모두 짐승 취급을 받았습니다. 저는 2019년 2월에 한국에 도착했습니다. 오늘 제 증언을 통해서 북한의 현실이 더욱 많이 알려주셨으면 감사하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you too for this impressive testimony. Now I hand over the floor to Mr. Jung Kwang-il, who is serving as a chairman of the No Chain for North Korea movement and who is also a survivor of a political prison, the camp number 15, Yoduk. The floor is yours.
안녕하세요. 제 이름은 정광열입니다. 저는 사실 COI에서 10년 전에 제가 증언을 했고요. 많은 증언을 했습니다. 국제사회에서. 제가 북한에 있을 때 여독에서 수감됐던 사실을요. 근데 오늘 제3또 증언을 하게 됩니다. 저는 북한에서 무역을 했습니다. 무역을 하는 동안 중국에 나와서 한국 사람들하고 접촉하게 되었습니다. 왜냐하면 장사를 하다 보니까 한국 사람들하고 접촉했는데 그 과정에서 제 부하 직원이 저를 감시했습니다. 사실 그때는 저는 몰랐습니다. 몰랐는데 그 직원이 신고하다 보니까 제가 체포되어서 1999년 7월 22일에 체포되었습니다. 북한 국가안전보위부에 체포되어 가지고 끌려가서 그날부터 별의별 고문을 다 받았습니다. 정말 상상하기가 어려워. 지금도 생각하면 끔찍합니다. 뭐 전기고문, 물고문, 강목으로 두드려 맞고 그러다 보니까 제가 남한 간첩이라고 하는데 저는 사실 간첩 임무를 받은 적이 없습니다. 간첩도 아니었고 그런데 인정을 하라고 해가지고 보위부 유치장에 제가 10개월간 있었습니다. 체포될 때 체중이 75kg였는데 10개월이 지난 다음 체중이 36kg가 됐습니다. 제대로 걷지도 못했습니다. 그런 상황이다 보니까 제가 거짓 자백을 했죠. 간첩이 맞다고. 거짓 자백을 하니까 10개월 만에 바로 여독정치범 수용소에 보내더라고요. 여독정치범 수용소에 갔습니다. 제가 정확히 2000년 4월 6일 날 여독정치범 수용소에 들어갔습니다. 행명화구역이에요. 여독정치범 수용소에서 수감 생활을 했습니다. 근데 정말 들어가 보니까 많은 수감자들이 있었고 정말 끔찍했습니다. 지금은 수감자들 상태가 완전히 몰골이 말 그대로 인간이 아니었습니다. 그리고 수감자들을 관리하는 사람들 자체가 너희는 인간이 아니고 반동이다 이렇게 취급을 했습니다. 그런 취급을 받으면서 수감 생활을 했고 일을 제대로 못하면 식량 공급을 안 합니다. 북한이 58년도에 제정한 노동 경영제에 따라서 일을 해야 됩니다. 일을 안 하면 밥을 안 줍니다. 그러다 보니까 수많은 수감자들이 굶어 죽고 여름에는 옥수수 농사를 했고 겨울에는 벌목을 시켰습니다. 벌목을 하면서 겨울에는 또 숱한 사람들이 사고로 다쳐서 죽기도 하고 여름에는 영양실조에 걸려서 죽기도 했고 그런 생활을 여독에서 했습니다. 하루에 평균 16시간 강제 노역을 시켰고요. 그 다음엔 그냥 또 휴식시키는 것도 아니고 저녁 2시간 이상씩 그냥 학습을 시켰고 제가 2003년 4월 12일에 석방되었습니다. 간첩이 아니라는 것이 판명되어서 석방되어 가지고 나와서 제가 북한에서 12일 만에 탈북을 해가지고 중국, 베트남, 캄보디아, 태국을 거쳐가지고 2003년도에 한국에 오게 되었습니다. 한국에 와서 지금 현재까지는 북한 인권 활동을 하고 있고요. 여러 차례 지금 노체인이라는 단체를 운영하면서 정치범 수용소 해체를 위해서 많은 활동을 했습니다. 했는데 솔직히 COI가 생겨서 10년이 지났는데 아무런 성과도 없습니다. 그렉스 콜라드도 이야기했지만 저도 사실 많은 기대를 가졌습니다. COI가 생겼을 때 그때 증언도 직접 했댔고 그러니까 이게 바뀌어질 수 있겠구나 했는데 바뀌어진 게 전혀 없습니다. 아직도 과거형이 아니고요. 북한의 정치범 수용소는 과거형이 아닙니다. 현재도 존재하고 있고 인권유린 행위가 지금 현재도 존재하고 있습니다. 그리고 지금 저는 이 활동 외에도 외부 정보 유입을 시켜가지고 북한의 마이크로 SD 카드라든가 아니면 예전에 USB를 보내기도 하고 이런 외부 정보 유입 활동도 많이 하고 있는데 저는 10년 후에 COI가 어떤 성과를 이뤄냈으면 좋겠습니다. 저도 2008년도에 제가 ICC에까지 가서 당시 김정일이를 국제형사재판소에 제소할 수 있겠는가를 가서 문의하기도 했고 그리고 여러 차례 했지만 지금 COI가 생겨서 10년이 지나는데 아무런 변화가 없습니다. 앞으로 10년 후에는 좀 커다란 변화가 있었으면 하는 바람입니다. 예. 많은 지지와 성원을 부탁드립니다. 감사합니다.
Thanks to you for your testimony and also your ongoing engagement in human rights activities and also in enlightening the knowledge of us in Europe and all over the world. Without further ado, I want to hand over the floor to the remarks by Robert Collins, who serves as an HRNK senior advisor and author. While I again thank not only Michel Hoogeveen for the initiative for today's event, but also the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea for co-organizing this, because in the Korea delegation, which I have the privilege to chair in this very parliament, we theoretically discuss a lot, and I guess we push forward the right policies when it comes to the Korean Peninsula, alignment with South Korea, and critical engagement and more regarding North Korea. On the global stage, especially denuclearization, but to have this practical testimony and these insights we receive through this today's event from former prisoners who I'm happy to see you in person, who could leave different than others, but also through intelligence, as we have seen before in the presentation on the satellite imagery. It's extremely valuable for our work, and that's why I look forward to the remarks by Robert Collins. The floor is yours.
Thank you. North Korea is a country where every single citizen, regardless of type of who they are, or where they work, or where they live, every single citizen has to be loyal. Has to be loyal to one man, and that is the supreme leader. Anybody caught not being loyal ends up in the political prison camps that you just heard about, or they are executed. There is no choice. You have to demonstrate this loyalty. And as Greg was talking about earlier, the regime produces an ideological blueprint for what everybody must read and study that tells them how they're supposed to be loyal, and that's called the 10 Principles of Monolithic Ideology. They study this. They don't study the Constitution. They don't study law or anything like that in high school or in college. They have to study the TPMI, and that tells them how to be loyal. So the expectation is that you will be loyal and you will demonstrate this loyalty, and this is recorded on a weekly basis about just how loyal you are. Now, North Korea, the Kim regime, it's not run by government. It is run by the Korean Workers' Party. The Korean Workers' Party establishes policy. The government does whatever the Korean Workers' Party says, carries it out. And so throughout the country, there is an embedded Korean Workers' Party committee at every institution that you can think of, whether it be military, police, government, even inside its own party they have these. Every social organization, every economic organization has an embedded party committee. This committee gives the mission to that particular institution, whether it's military or whatever. It gives them instruction on how to do this. Now, the political prison camps, there's two agencies run these camps. One is the Ministry of State Security, or the secret police. The other one is the National Police, and they run these camps. And in each camp, there is an embedded Korean Workers' Party committee that runs the camp. Now, inside that process, inside the party, what runs the party is the Organization and Guidance Department. It has about 1,000 people in it that represent the various institutions and go out and ensure that the embedded committees carry out the missions that is told to by the Organization and Guidance Department. They run North Korea, and they work personally for, as you can imagine, Kim Jong-un, the supreme leader. Now, there is an organizational secretary working in all of these embedded committees. And so at the political prison camp, within the embedded party committee is an organizational secretary. And that organizational secretary monitors everybody that works in the camp. Not talking about the prisoners, I'm talking about the workers that run the camp. And their expectation is that those individuals have to be mean, cruel as possible to the prisoners. And so the way they do this, everybody in North Korea, except for one person, but everybody in North Korea goes through what is called Sengwal Chonghwa. That is a lifestyle self-critique. And weekly, sometimes every 3 days, you have to stand up and say what your shortcomings were in dealing with the TPMI and your loyalty to the mission of where you work and whatnot. And after you say what you did poorly, then another person will stand up and critique you in the same manner. And so you get sort of like a double whammy. This is all recorded by the organizational secretary and kept on record forever, till you die. Excuse me. So the political prison workers have to confess that they weren't mean enough, that they weren't strict enough, that they didn't beat the prisoners enough. This is literally how they are monitored. And if there's any sense of kindness, then they're turned around and they're the ones that end up in the prison. And so the entire structure, from Kim Jong-un down through the Organization and Guidance Department, down to the Ministry of State Security, down to the National Police, down to these prison camps, the embedded committee is going to record everything that those guys did. And the instructions from the supreme leader, Kim Jong-un's father, Kim Jong-il, said, everybody in these prison camps is like poisonous grass, and we must pull it out of the earth. And that's how they're supposed to be treated. Lightening up, not going to happen. You heard the witnesses say how bad off they were. It's because of the system tells that they've got to be cruel to these prisoners. And so that's how the system is run. Party, police stations, or police agencies, prison camps, embedded committee, organizational secretary, workers have to confess how bad they have to treat the prisoners. With that, I'll answer it so you have time to close.
Time is quickly passing by. Thanks for the insights also to you, Mr. Collins. Again, what is meant to be my final remarks due to the agenda I have already stated. I'm extremely grateful for the testimony because it goes beyond our usual diplomatic and political talk. When it comes to the Korean Peninsula, it's the very thing we are meant to defend as European Union, as the free world. It's human dignity, it's individual freedom, and this is what is tortured there physically. Thanks again. I can imagine it's absolutely not easy. And it's not given that you would be ready to share your experience with us, but you do, and it will help. It will help to properly contact with today's refugees from North Korea who make it to South Korea and other parts of the world, and it will help to better understand what we can see on pictures and what we discuss politically, and this is why your contribution to our political and parliamentary endeavor here can never be and must never be underestimated. So thank you again, and I really mean it that I thank again Michael Hoogeveen for the initiative for today. We are doing a lot in this delegation, but this is a very special occasion you made happen today. Michael Hoogeveen, and also thanks to the co-organizers and everybody interested, and I can assure you that there will be a lot of follow-up on the insights we have received due to this event. Thank you again for joining.